Yes, welcome to the Biz Communication Show. I'm your host, Bill Lampton, once again welcoming you to a discussion about business communication tips and strategies with a guest who will help us boost our business because of our conversation that we share with you. Today, our guest is Paul Webb, a graduate of the Virginia Military Institute. He was a commissioned officer in the United States Air Force. He earned a nuclear launch officer position while training for the 1904 Olympic trials in the marathon. He has worked for the Meade Corporation as sales manager, and his travels with the Meade Corporation with promotions took him to Chicago and Atlanta. In 2000, Paul became an entrepreneur. That's 2 decades ago, forming Miracle Inc., that's Miracle Incorporated, a communications and financial services firm, and most recently, the Paul Webb Agency and Webb Wealth Advisors, a financial services and insurance firm. Paul has been recognized by the $1 Million Round Table as an elite financial planner, placing him in the top 1% of all financial planners in the United States. On the personal side, Paul has 5 children and 8 grandchildren as a Rotarian with the Lanier Forsyth Rotary Club. He volunteer coaches basketball and attends Mountain Lake Church in Cumming. As you can tell, a very versatile and very accomplished guy. Paul Webb, welcome to the Biz Communication Show.
Thank you, Bill. It's great to be on. And I want to say to you and all your listeners, may God bless you always.
Thank you, sir. We need that very much these days. We need it in all times, but certainly in these times.
Yes,
Noticing
sir.
that you attended and graduated from the Virginia Military Institute, I'm curious, Paul, what communication skills did you learn as a student, and I suppose we'd call it a cadet at Virginia Military Institute, that have carried over into your professional life and been very beneficial for you?
Yes, sir. Before I answer that, I just want to give a big shout out to all the military people serving in the U.S. and around the world. Thank you so much for your service, and God bless you.
Yes,
all right,
sir.
Bill. Yes, sir. Thank you all. Yes, Bill. So very blessed to attend the Virginia Military Institute. The communication skills and the discipline that I learned there have been incredibly helpful in my career always. Number one, when you have the discipline to get up at the crack of dawn and not go to bed till midnight, it helps you get a lot done. Communication wise, after being, I was a nuclear missile launch officer, as you know, and you want to be very clear when you're given the signal to launch your missile or you give the order to launch the missile. So
that's not something you can be nearly accurate on, is it?
Yes, sir. Communication is key in those situations for sure. So I learned to be very clear and concise and try to be direct as possible. Try to listen. I mean, listening is such a key element in communication, and responding to the situation and how the troops are behaving and acting. If their morale's down, you need to read that. So it's more than just verbal communication. It's a full communication, looking at all signals: physical, mental, and emotional.
And these were factors for you in the military that were not just a matter of whether you get a raise or whether you get a promotion. It had to do with very critical, almost, I assume, life and death situations.
Yes, sir. That's absolutely correct. The nuclear missile that I commanded had a nuclear warhead capable of destroying millions of lives. So it was very important to be on your game always.
As you said, I'm quite sure, in addition to the communication skills, the discipline that you learned has had lifelong professional and personal benefits. I know I attended a military prep school for 2 years, and all of a sudden you change your lackadaisical habits. You become regimented in the positive sense of the word. You become very keen at time management. There are many advantages. One of the points that you made, I'd like to come back to, and that's giving
Sure.
clear instructions. Many times I've discussed on this program with communication experts that top management might think we're giving clear instructions, but you brought in the factor of listening. That's how you find out whether they're clear.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That's true. Obviously, you need to listen and you need to recognize the signals. I always give a recap. What are the three things I just reviewed? And I recap them and I say, is everybody clear on that? Does everybody fully understand what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do it? And I make sure I have a lot of head nods and confirmation.
It reminds me of a game we used to play as kids, and that would be you'd line up a group of kids, and the first one would say something to the next one, and then they would keep repeating it. And then by the time it got to the end of that chain, you check to see how much the original message had been translated correctly, understood, remembered, and then repeated. That's quite a shocking illustration, isn't it?
Yes, sir. Things can change dramatically from the first communication to the last.
Well, getting to your role as a highly recognized and credentialed and qualified and honored financial advisor, one of the things that comes to my mind is that the financial industry, like every other industry, has its own jargon. I would think that when you're talking to a prospective client, there are ways that you are able to take that industry jargon and put it into terms that your prospective client can understand. What are some of the ways that you do that, Paul?
Yes, sir. I really try to speak concisely and clearly. I'll mention a few sentences and then I'll kind of check back in with the prospect. Are you following me? Do you have any questions? Do you understand everything I'm saying? There are a lot of buzzwords like fiduciary and things like that. And at the end of the day, a fiduciary, as big of a word as that sounds, is just someone that's going to do what's best for the client, no matter what. And it doesn't take a special exam. It doesn't take a special license. That's who you are as a person. That's how you were raised. That's your morals. And that's your moral compass to do what the client asks and understands. And I really, if at any point I'm using a big word and I look at the client, I can see they deer in headlights. I of course say, hey, let's break that down. Let's talk about that word and the meaning of that.
You get the nonverbal feedback as well as any questions they might ask, but you can fairly easily tell when somebody's confused and needs you to give some more illustrations about it. Do you ever hand out a glossary of terms that you might be using?
I have done that in the past. I have that's a good idea, and I have used that idea on occasions, depending on the prospect that I'm dealing with. And if they tell me before the meeting I have absolutely no idea about financial investments or anything, then yes, sir, I have used that, and that's good that you bring that up.
I think it's helpful in many instances. And if you were talking to me, I didn't major in finance like you did. So I would probably need that glossary of a dozen terms that we're going to be discussing.
Yes,
something else that I'm thinking about when you're dealing with prospective clients, and you've been doing this very successfully for quite a while. And one of the things that I think about that you see as a communication hurdle you need to overcome if you're going to provide the services that the client really needs, one of those communication hurdles is the potential client's tendency to procrastinate. Well, Paul, I think what you're talking about makes sense. And I'll get back with you on that, or I'll put that on my calendar and we'll talk about that later. It reminds me of a statement Daniel Webster made, which I've quoted quite often. Daniel Webster said, "He who waits until the time is ripe often waits until the time is rotten." So
That's a good one. I like it.
you might use that.
Yes,
So,
sir.
how is it you move people from saying, well, someday, to getting them to say, let's do this today, without any, high pressure? But what are your steps in doing that?
Sure. First of all, I try to understand why they wouldn't move on it today. First of all, you got to understand why they wouldn't move on it. Is it money? Is it worry? Is it, what's the situation? So
Do
that's
you
the
ask
first.
a question along that line?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
What is it that's holding you
What
back?
has you concerned about moving forward today on this project? And, depending on what they say, I'll, make them clearly aware of the facts. Waiting, it's going to cost you money, number one, because failure to act, as you said, things can go from good to rotten. Like in the case of a volatile market, it's been up and down. If a client doesn't act, move their money to a safe place, they could lose 30 or 40%. And I just make them aware that, when there's market risk, you're at risk, your money's at risk. So that's what I try to do, is just cite the facts and what's going on and the latest knowledge in the market.
In other words, not any high pressure, but simply saying you can lose significantly if you don't act now. And by the same token, by acting now, you can profit eventually.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. That is absolutely true. Yes, sir.
You mentioned listening, and you mentioned that you learned in the military that you would have people repeat back to you to make sure that they understood the command that you had given. Now, when you're dealing with a prospective client, as we've said, you look at them to find out whether they look confused or whether they seem on track with what you're saying. You give them an opportunity to question. So I don't know that if you've ever tried to put this into a percentage basis, but in a meeting with a prospective client, what would you say is the percentage of time that you're making your presentation and the percentage of time that the person is responding, listening, asking questions, probing?
I try to make it an even dialogue. I don't want it to be a monologue. I don't want me talking, 80% of the time and them only talking 20% of the time. So I'd say it would be somewhere around 60-40 on the percent break. I would talk 60. I would convey the information, the benefits, why this, I think it's specifically good for them and will help them financially and as far as risk and worry. And then I let them talk and ask them questions, as you say, and give them, at least 40%, because again, a fair communication at least has the prospect talking about what they want and need and why they like what I've offered or why they don't.
Yes. And I think 60-40 sounds ideal, because you've got to be, first of all, in control of the conversation. And secondly, you definitely have to be sharing the information that will help them make their decisions.
Yes, sir.
I want to share with you and with our listeners a comment that I heard when I was in a networking group a couple of years ago. And it was one of those networking groups where everybody had 30 seconds to get up and tell what they do. And I went to this group for about 2 years. I heard a variety of, I guess we'd call them 30-minute pitches or elevator speeches or whatever. And one of the most impressive ones that I remember so well, there was an insurance salesman in the group, life insurance salesman. Mm-hmm. And he stood up one day and he gave a very brief intro to what he does. And he looked at the group and he said, I want to help you write a love letter to your family. Now, those of us in the audience just sort of went into a hushed state. That was so gripping. And in my judgment and my observation, someone who's trying to help us make a financial decision has to make it personal, not just dollars and cents, not just what you'll profit or what you will lose. What strategies, and they of course have to be genuine, what strategies do you have, Paul, for bringing it home to a person, not just in a group of numbers that you've handed them or a spreadsheet or whatever? How do you make it really personal, the benefits that they'll get?
Sure. I try to, obviously, in my fact-finding mission, understand if they have children or grandchildren, get their names, understand what they're doing in their lives and careers, what their ambitions are. And then let's say it's a grandparent that wants to take out a life insurance policy and be able to leave a legacy for their family. So I specifically reference their names: Bill, Susie, Johnny. You want them to go to college, don't you? What if you don't come home tonight? So I try to just make them imagine, if they do not come home, what are Susie and Johnny and their children and family going to do? Will they have to move out of their house? We have to move out of that beautiful house at, 123 Circle Lane. Will your children not be able to go to college? Will they be destitute? Will they be homeless? That's pretty severe. But, if you're looking out for people's future, you need to understand how much life insurance you need for your family and why you need it, and all the reasons relating to the family members' names, goals, aspirations, and getting them there and leaving a legacy that they'll say, thank God my grandmother gave me life insurance. It's created a whole new world for me.
That's very, very gripping. That's very gripping. And you remind me, I would imagine in your studies of communication and sales training, you've heard of Zig Ziglar.
Yes, sir.
And one of Zig had many great bits of advice that he left us. And one I liked so much is he said, no salesman ever went broke who remembered the names of his prospects and clients' children.
Yes. Yes, sir.
And
absolutely.
The tug of our family and the security of our family and the future of our family, that becomes more important to us every decade. When we are newlyweds, when we're in our 30s and we seem to have forever ahead of us, that's when maybe the sale is a little harder to take. But the more we live, the more we realize that there are finite situations in families, whether we want to talk about them or not. Every one of us is in a finite situation. And what are we going to do about that for our legacy that we love? Paul, it's no wonder to me that you have become greatly successful, not only because of the discipline that you learned in your military career, but with what you've accumulated in the way of personal and professional and sales skills. So wonderful conversation. I know people will want to get in touch with you. So please share your contact information with us.
Yes, sir. My phone number is 678-410-7902. And I go to my website or my email, which is paul.webb@american-national.com. And my website is www.webbwealthadvisors.com. And I'm up in Cumming, Georgia.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And I know that our viewers and our podcast listeners we'll want to follow up and get in touch with you, Paul. And now that you've given your information, contact information, I will give mine, Bill Lampton, the biz communication guy. And so logically, my website is bizcommunicationguy.com. Invite you to go there. Check my services for corporations and leaders. Give me a call. Let's talk about your communication problems and challenges and how I can assist you with them. Paul, any 20-second closing thoughts?
Yes, I just want to thank you, Bill, for the opportunity, and thank all your listeners for listening to us today. It was an honor and privilege to be on your show. And please give me a call as well, and let me protect your retirement and financial future to create wealth and happiness in retirement.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks to those of us who joined us, those of you who joined us today on the Biz Communication Show, on the video portion or the podcast. Be with us again next week when I have the privilege of hosting another outstanding business professional who will help us with our biz communication. I'm Bill Lampton, the Biz Communication Guy.